Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 57 of the Capitalist Corner. I am your host, Mark Pellegrino, and the chairman of the American Capitalist Party, along with my co-host and vice chair of the American Capitalist Party, Michael Liebowitz, who is also the star of his own podcast, The Rational Egoist. Today is going to be Q&A day for anybody who has brought their questions and answers to the chair and the vice chair of the Capitalist Party. Please bring them. We are more than happy to answer them if we can. We also have quite a bit of things to talk about as well in the meantime. Hopefully they will interest you. I'm sure they will. Please hit your like and subscribe button before you even had a chance to hear anything we say. Just assume you're going to like the things that we have to say and hit that like and subscribe button because it's super good for the algorithms. Michael, anything to say about The Rational Egoist? Any new episodes coming up?
We have a great episode out right now. Multitasking currently, so I can post a clip from it. It's an interview with Lawrence Reed about the Great Depression. Very, very good interview. He's an Austrian economist, not from the Austrian school. It's absolutely great. You got to tune in and you'll check it out. You'll love it.
Oh, we're already having discussion, I think, about the Dave Smith debate with Konstantin Kisin. Is that how you pronounce Konstantin's last name?
I haven't got the slightest idea, so I'll just go with Kisin.
Yeah, I first saw him in a I think talking in Parliament or something, and it was some of the most amazing stuff I'd ever seen. I became a fan of his instantaneously, and of course, this is not the first time I guess he's debated Dave Smith. Apparently, this is a multiple episode engagement, and this one was on Piers Morgan of all people. But it turned out to be a relatively tame debate. I think Konstantin lends, the tameness to the debate, not Dave Smith necessarily, and also lots of doses of truth. But I find that Dave still produces a great deal of irrelevancies when he's talking. He just talks very fast and somewhat knowledgeably because he's read the New Historians. But most of what he says to me is irrelevant, even though Konstantin addresses it. It's all irrelevant. I hear music going on in the background. Are you playing music instead of listening to the words?
No, I'm multitasking. I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm ready to go. I'm just, like I said, I got up this morning, and I had to go to Wethersfield, and I found out that the town hall in Wethersfield closes at 1. So I had to go there before rather than after, and then it led me to have to multitask here. So I'm paying attention to you, posting a video, about to be done posting it, and then we're ready to rock and roll.
Not to sound sexist, but you realize that men have a much more difficult time multitasking than women, and you've just proven it just in this instance.
I don't think I proved anything because I've multitasked quite effectively here.
No, you dropped the ball on multiple occasions, but I'm going to let you get away with it for this time around. So you watched the whole debate, yeah?
I did watch the whole debate, yes.
Tell me your overall point of view.
Well, it's hard for me to ever judge Dave Smith debates because I have a visceral dislike for him. So you have to factor in my bias. I know what he does. I don't even know if he's aware that he's doing it, but it's all about the primary processing of the viewer or the listener, right? It's about connecting emotionally, giving off cues that people take without even knowing it and accept his arguments. Like when he raises his voice, his expressions of absolute certainty, the making of the faces when the other person is talking. These are
also his denial of what he's doing. Like he'll actually do something, and then when Konstantin calls him
right,
and denies
yes, and he's learned. What I think a lot of people have done this. They've like Googled logical fallacies, and then they just throw them out there during discussions and say, that's this fallacy without really understanding it. So I'll get the things that I really took away before I tell you about the substance of the debate were. Konstantin Kisin started off, and I thought it was great because he said, look, I'm not an expert on this topic. He frankly put it right out there. He said, but if you want to have a conversation like we're two guys at a bar, I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? But there's people that really know. That's different from the tack that Dave takes, where he puts it out there like he really understands all
Did you
the
see
inner
Dave's
workings
face
of
when he said
everything.
that? By the way, did you see Dave's face?
No, I did not, but I can imagine. The other thing that I really disliked about the discussion was in Piers Morgan was actually on, weighing in Konstantin's favor, but I didn't like that. It's like, dude, just shut up and let these two guys talk. I don't need to know your opinion on this right now. I want to hear what these guys are saying. But then there was the moment when Dave said, Piers, you understand what I'm saying, right? You understand, which I thought was absurd. And so there was this one sort of moment in the debate where Konstantin said to Dave, so you're basically just saying that the American government is a gullible dupe for the Israeli government. And Dave said, that's such a straw man, and then proceeds immediately afterwards to make the exact argument that Konstantin was criticizing him for making. Exactly. And Dave said that was a straw man argument. But I think that I read something on X this morning, and I think it really encapsulates the view of a lot of people. And the person said, you have such a simplistic view, war or no war, and war is bad. They were saying it to Dave. And what it reminds me of when they say they're anti-war is the people who, when I say I'm opposed to government-funded education, they say, oh, you want kids to go without education, or if you don't support welfare, they say you want kids to starve. It's a very easy and almost, I want to say, I hate to say this. Should I say? I'm going to say it anyway. It's a cowardly position to take because nobody wants war, right? Like who, and other than madmen, people don't want war. That's not the argument. The argument is that when is it necessary?
Yes.
Right. That's the argument to have, not just every war that I'm against war. I'm against war, because sometimes you don't have a choice. And then, you end up with a lot of complicated questions. When is a preemptive strike warranted? How much retaliatory force is necessary? And these are complex questions, quite honestly, that I don't have the answer to. I'm in Konstantin's camp. I'm not an expert. I'm skeptical of the claims.
By the way, this is the way I started our strange conversation, my strange conversation with him. I said we're not experts on it, and I also said neither of us are going to convince the other person's side of our point of view. And I was hoping that would lend a conversational air to it. Perhaps I should have punctuated with, let's just be two blokes at a bar talking about our opinions.
Yeah.
Because that really did set the bar a certain level. Dave hated it, of course, because it turned him into a non-elitist.
There is a new dynamic going on, and it's part of, the famous experts have, caused this problem where people no longer trust experts. That's fine. But they've now made this jump to everybody's an expert. And it's just not the case. When I interviewed Phil Magnus on tariffs, I know a lot of basic economic theory, economic history, right? But there's a lot of inner workings of the economics discipline that I don't know, that I didn't go to school for 12 years or whatever it is to get a PhD, 8 years, I think it is, to learn. So I can have an intelligent discussion about economics, but I can't get into the inner workings that an expert can. And so similarly, when it comes to foreign policy, I'm even less confident. What I do bring to the table is a skepticism of what the government says and a fear of what's going to happen if we engage in military action because of unintended consequences. Now, there's also the flip side of that, right? Is what are going to be the unintended consequences of not acting? And those are very difficult choices to make, and they don't just come down to Dave's simplistic idea of war or no war. And I think that Konstantin's strongest moment in the entire debate, because I've often thought this about myself, right? I was so wrong about the Iraq war, and I just get to say now, I was wrong. I'll never fall for that again. But if you're George W. Bush and you're the president at that moment, right, you have to make a decision about what to do. And afterwards, hundreds of thousand people die. You don't get to just say, I was wrong or I was mistaken. And what Konstantin said to Dave was, Dave, you just recently changed your mind about Trump. You just say, I changed my mind, and there's no real consequence. You could afford to be wrong. The Israelis can't.
That was a great point.
They can't afford to be wrong. And I thought it was a fantastic point. And, they might be wrong. I don't think they are. I'm just saying, but hypothetically, they could be wrong in launching the attack, and then they have to live with that. But from their perspective, if I'm an Israeli, I'm willing to take the risk, right? That I'm going to regret bombing Iran, because I'm going to regret if Iran wipes me out. Well, I'm not going to regret it. I'm going to be dead, but you get my point. I really don't want that to happen. I don't want to be wiped out. And I thought that was a very strong point on
That was a great rhetorical flourish on his part. I have to say, Dave claims nuance, but what he does is he takes incredibly nuanced situations and only interprets them from the lens that's most uncharitable to Israel. And he always says usually the same things about how Netanyahu tried to stifle a two-state solution without even thinking about the fact that, well, one, he's speaking to political conservatives, the Likud, who want one Israeli state, but also the fact that the Palestinian identity is not based on a two-state solution either. That the Palestinian identity is based on wiping out the Jews, taking over what little land they have as a state, and claiming it for their own. So until the Palestinian identity itself goes away, and perhaps just becomes a normal identity that's not equated with Islamic fanaticism and Palestinian nationalism joined together as a sort of movement, the two states could be a possibility. But until that happens, they can't. There's no possible way two states can happen until Palestinian toxic society actually reforms. And to acknowledge that reality, Dave has to acknowledge that reality, and that perhaps Netanyahu's perspective is partly based in a real assessment, a real-time assessment of the risks of what are going on in that region. He's also brought up the fact that Netanyahu allowed funding to go through Qatar, and that he did this to try to play Hamas off the Palestinian Authority, forgetting that the Palestinian Authority did try to form a coalition with Hamas. The Palestinian Authority is committing acts of terrorism as we speak. And that, yes, it may be bad pragmatic politics, but most governments engage in that kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and get involved with unsavory alliances in an attempt to hobble both.
Mark, you know what the problem is? If Netanyahu tells the Qataris, no, you cannot send aid into Gaza, then Dave and his pals are out there saying they won't even let aid go into Gaza. They're denying aid. Now, look, I don't trust Netanyahu as far as I can throw him. I don't particularly like the guy, but I think that's largely irrelevant to the broader point. William F. Buckley, in his book, Let Us Talk of Many Things, he talked about Murray Rothbard. And he said Murray Rothbard had a problem where he couldn't distinguish between pushing an old woman down to get her out of the way of an oncoming truck and pushing her down to take her purse. In Murray's mind, it's just you're pushing her down. And that's what Dave reminds me of when he makes statements like, well, Israel has nuclear weapons. Why aren't we concerned about that? Why are we only concerned about Iran? Why does it only go one way? And he completely just obliterates from his mind the fact that for all of the problems with the Israeli government and Israeli system, they are a modern democratic state, right? Iran is a theocracy governed by people still living in the Middle Ages, for God's sake.
Living morally in the Middle Ages.
Yes. And it's the same thing. He just wipes out the role of Islam in the entire equation.
Always refusing, always trying to make the least charitable interpretation for Israel, to make Israel that guy in every respect.
Right. And it's
like his example that, hey, even Tulsi Gabbard, the intelligence community, said there is no nuclear weapon. Well, they've enriched uranium to 60%. That means the possibility exists that they can take it that that few percentage points more to make it a weapon. Now, whether or not they are doing that for themselves, whether or not they decide to sell that to the North Koreans or some terrorist organization, doesn't seem to enter Dave Smith's.
They don't. And I thought Konstantin was masterful on this point as well. He said, yes, Netanyahu has called for regime change in Iran. Iran has called for the obliteration of Israel.
Yes, and that is a massive moral distinction that Dave refuses to acknowledge, and he didn't even acknowledge it then.
No, he simply refuses to. And it's just, there's this big fixation. Oh, this guy, Radio Zalaza says, every time I listen to a member of the Hapa Mafia, one of my brain cells dies.
I feel the same way.
That is a good one. But I really thought that Konstantin did a good job of explaining that you have one side that wants to completely wipe the other off the map. Israel doesn't want to do that to them. But you're right. Dave just ignores those distinctions.
What did Dave do? He went over to Gaza. And of course, we have pictures of Gaza being completely flattened, and then tried to morally equivocate again. Oh, really? Israel doesn't want to obliterate its enemies entirely? Look what's happening in Gaza. Completely dropping the fact that Hamas has not surrendered, the Palestinian people have not surrendered, they have not given back the hostages, they would not acknowledge the legitimacy of Israel as a state. They continue to believe in the Palestinian movement, which is a murderous, insane movement centered around martyrdom and killing Jews. And until the time that happens, the war must continue.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the other point that he made, but I will say I'm reminded of this interview I did with Adi Schwartz. He's an Israeli. I think he's a reporter, really smart guy. And he wrote a book, I believe, and he talked about the biggest problem is the biggest lie. He said the idea that there's ever going to be the right of return it's never going to happen. So he said, as long as people keep holding that out as that's the goal, because that's the goal of the Palestinians, you're never going to resolve this. I don't think that it's ever going to be resolved anyways, but I certainly think that lying to people or presenting false hope or a false possibility is not the way to go.
Look, the 5 million more refugees created by the UN adjusting the refugee status for the Palestinians would indeed demographically change Israel, and they know it. It's a way of, quote unquote, peacefully destroying Israel without arms.
We have a question, and I don't really understand it, from Shay. Shay says, are the hostages the only thing Israel have against Palestinians? Does that warrant damage to other countries? I don't really understand. Clarify the question.
The hostages are not the only thing that the Israelis have on the Palestinians. The Israelis have a toxified culture ruled by religious fanatics whose sole goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. And Hamas is this sort of secularized version. The Palestinian Authority is the more or less secularized version of that. They came from the Fatah. They came from Arafat's secular Marxism that actually created the narrative that goes for the Palestinian story today. KGB created narrative about a colonized people, being pushed under the boot of Israeli imperialism. So it's an ideology that runs throughout the culture that puts it on a more or less perennial war footing with Israel. They refuse to acknowledge that Israel is a legitimate state. They will not acknowledge that Israel is a legitimate state. They believe that the entire land is theirs, and they will not stop until the entire land is theirs.
Okay, so Shay clarifies. So I have a question for Shay, and it's a serious question. She says, or he says, I can't tell, because a lot of people use the excuse of, but Hamas still has Israeli hostages in response to excessive IDF attacks. Serious question here. What makes an attack excessive? Because this is what I was actually going to say. If I ever get a chance to debate any of these dudes, Dave Smith, Scott Horton, whoever, I'm not even getting near the practicalities of what's going on in Israel and in Gaza. I first want to know, you make a claim, for instance, excessive attack. By what standard? What's your standard of judgment? You're constantly making moral arguments, but I never understand where this morality is coming from. Because in order to talk about excessiveness or self-defense or retaliatory force, you first have to have a moral foundation by which to judge those things. And if it's just your subjective feeling that you don't like it, which in many cases is what I think it is, then I think that it's really needs to be exposed, but we never get to that. It's all just a matter, really, it's the back to the original thing. War is bad.
Can I tell you what my standard is? My standard is their surrender. Because by surrendering, they are now giving up the ideology that they've been holding on to for the past 45 years. And that ideology is the destruction of the state of Israel. Once they give that up and are open to recognizing Israel as a state, they are on the road to building their own state. Up until this time, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas have been diverting funds like mad, not only to oligarchs and leaders and their cronies and making them rich, but to militarizing their societies and to educating their societies with this toxic ideology that Jews are monsters. And this is what fuels that society. Now, until that's done, there's no amount of force that's excessive, because you need the amount of force to stop that. That's what you need. For example, somebody breaks into my house to kill me, to murder me. I need the exact amount of force to stop them from doing that permanently. Period. And that may mean killing them. It may mean breaking bones on their bodies until somebody gets here and is able to rescue me. But more than likely than not, it'll probably mean killing them, because nobody's going to come to my rescue in the amount of time that it could take for somebody to come here. So look, the proportional force is the amount of force it takes to end the threat permanently. That's what proportionate force is in defensive force.
All right, I want to scroll up because we've had a lot of comments, and I think I've missed some
Greg
questions.
Lewis says we have 377 subscribers now. We're up 3 from yesterday, so slowly but surely gaining ground. Capitalist Party slowly but surely sending out its benevolent tentacles across the United States of America and making converts. Thank you, Greg, for that. Also, Race has a question here from Kaya, but I'm not sure I understand it. So maybe if you read it, you'll understand it. Do you see it?
Okay, we have a question about super chats. We don't have super chats yet because we don't have enough subscribers.
But if you hit the like and subscribe button, we are going to have enough subscribers shortly. So we'll be able to do super chats soon.
Yes, you got to hit the like and subscribe.
So the question from Kaya, since she couldn't be here today, is you guys mentioned in a previous show that the ages of what adults can do should be across the board. But what age should that be? I don't remember this show, so maybe you can refresh me. I remember us talking about ages.
I think I do. See, this is where intrinsicism kills us, right? Because there is no perfect age. Because people differ. Some 18-year-olds are very mature, some are very immature. The human brain isn't fully developed until 25 or 26, but just because it's not fully developed doesn't mean it's not developed at all. So you have to accept some measure of the arbitrary. You have to resolve on an age for given things, voting, whatever. The problem is if you try to go by you have a concrete thing where you judge by each individual person, society would collapse. We simply can't do that. You can't have, for instance, a guy that's selling alcohol. He's got to figure out each person that comes in, whether that person's mature enough. So we have to put some age on it. I don't know what the best age is. I just know that there's a lot of hypocrisy and double standards built within our system, stemming from the vast differences. Like we talked about, for instance, a 15-year-old girl has sex with an 18-year-old guy. She's said to not be competent enough. That 15-year-old girl goes back and shoots that 18-year-old guy, and many people are saying, no, she should be charged as an adult. You understand? So we need to have some type of, at least it would be better.
I don't think she would be charged as an adult unless she shot him, stabbed him, cut off his head, and dismembered him.
It depends.
Once she does something egregious like that, then
even if she does whatever she does, if you're saying that her mind is not developed, then it's not developed. And we need to have objective standards. What I mean by objective isn't that we've discovered them out there. What I mean is standards that everybody can know ahead of time, that are consistent, so that we're not playing whack-a-mole with our age requirements. You simply can't. I mean, the idea that you can take an 18-year-old kid, he's old enough to sign up for the military, to go risk his life in war, but he's mature enough for. Not mature enough, though, to buy liquor. That seems utterly absurd.
These are all terrible paradoxes, and some of these things are culturally motivated. Certainly, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or 25 states where the age of consent is 16. Other states, it's 18. And certainly none of those ages reflect what's really going on with the individuals. But we do have to make these arbitrary calls. I know in Paris, if you're 13 years old, you can drink wine provided your parents are there in the restaurant with you. And of course, in Italy, some kids are drinking wine as young as 10 years old. And in the 1800s, at the state orphanages, beer was a part of the diet of the children. So clearly, we don't really have an objective standard for when these ages of consent and ages that we consider new legal responsibilities to fall on the shoulders of people, but we have to make them in order for our system to run smoothly.
There's some, I don't know what, we must have missed it, or at least I did, a debate. Katie Ellis says Shay is still allowed to ask questions like everyone else. Absolutely, she can ask questions, or he can. I think Shay is a he. Shay, can you tell me if you're a he or a she, because I need to know so I don't offend anyone. But yeah, ask your questions. We're here to answer questions, whether we agree with your questions or not. We're not. Oh, he's a dude. Okay, dude. So yeah, ask your questions. It's fine.
Yeah, please do. Please challenge us in any way you can. Akira Felix has a question for Michael. Are you a non-interventionist because you're concerned about the incompetence of government, or because you're a pacifist? Ooh.
No, I'm definitely not a pacifist. No, for one thing, I have a very difficult time believing them when they tell us, for instance, when you have Netanyahu, for instance, and I think everybody should know I'm in favor of Israel hitting Iran. But when Netanyahu has been saying since 92 that Iran is on the cusp of having a nuclear weapon, it makes me skeptical. When Netanyahu, I think in 2001 or 2002, said that Iraq, once we toppled Saddam, we'd be greeted as liberators, it makes me skeptical then of things that he claims. When our intelligence tells us that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and then he doesn't, when all these things, and it's the amount of times that the government has lied. It's not like it's it's a one-off. They lied about the Maine. They lied about Lusitania. They lied about the Gulf of Tonkin. I mean, this is over and over and over again. But then there's also the incompetence of them to get the job done. I mean, it started off, we need to get rid of the Taliban because they harbored bin Laden. And it turns into, we got to change the hearts and minds of the Afghani people. Next thing you know, we're there for 20 something years. I don't remember how long we were in Iraq for, but for a very long time, and nothing to show for it. So when you're talking about, and plus then there's the other thing is that's the unintended consequence.
Nothing to show for it.
Foreseen.
Nothing.
What do we have to show for it?
We left them billions and billions of our military.
Oh yeah. What I mean we had nothing good to show for it.
They have something to show for it.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Ian Gilmore, I agree that they were wrong. I shouldn't have said lied. What I meant is that the information they gave us was not correct. Ian, you're correct. They didn't intentionally deceive us, but that leads to a whole different problem. So you have one problem where they lie to get us into conflicts, another problem where they're just wrong on the intelligence assessments, another problem where when we do intervene, it doesn't go the way that we want it to go. So that
there's a reason for that, Michael. It's because of just war theory and rules of engagement.
Listen, whatever the reason is, that's the reality that we're dealing with.
But that's an important context.
Sure, but if we go to war with Iran, Mark Pellegrino's not making the decisions. Donald Trump is. Now, if I don't trust Donald Trump in any other endeavor, why would I trust him in the most serious of all? That's why I'm non-interventionist. Plus, ultimately, I believe that
I'm still waiting for the fundamental thing. I haven't heard yet.
You've heard of fundamentally all different things.
What
do you mean?
I haven't heard the fundamental reason why you're non-interventionist.
I'm going to tell you, fundamentally, it's because I believe that the only proper force is in self-defense, retaliatory force, or if there is a serious imminent threat. And that derives straight from my ethical theory. Now, we can debate about the imminent threat piece, and that's important. When is somebody else an imminent threat to us? And all I'm saying, when it comes to something like Iran, I'm very skeptical about the claim that they're an imminent threat to us. And it cost a lot of money and a lot of lives. So that, I mean, it's a long answer, but that's why I'm non-interventionist. It doesn't mean, like, I don't think there's things that people say that I think are absolutely dumb. I don't think it's a ridiculous position that we ought to help Israel take out Iran. I don't think, wow, people that think that they're gone. I disagree, but but it's not even that I couldn't be convinced. I think there's a lot of room within there. And especially for people like me, I'm not an expert on the subject. That's one of the reasons Dave Smith drives me crazy, because he speaks with such an authority about things he has no business speaking like an authority about.
Because so he hasn't read both sides of the coin. He's only read one side, and the least charitable side. So Akira, I agree with Michael. I am a non-interventionist as well, but a non-interventionist exclusively because I believe that the purpose of the American government is to defend the individual rights of its individual citizens, which means to defend them in the event of some kind of initiated force. But when the United States government defends American lives, it should do so with overwhelming violence. That means to completely end the threat entirely. Now, here's my position. Dave Smith is carrying on about the might of the Iranian army, which blows my mind, considering that before we invaded Iraq, a war I didn't agree with, the media was going crazy about the fact that, oh my God, Saddam Hussein has a 1 million-man army. We are so fucked. He's going to use chemical and biological weapons. This is going to be Armageddon. We beat the army in 2.5 weeks. Most of them ran, because go figure, tyranny, usually armies and tyrannies don't really have a very strong motivation to defend their leader. So we beat them in 2.5 weeks. An army, I might add, that fought Iran for 10 years.
With our help. With our help.
But an Iranian army that had to send 12-year-old boys to the front line to clear minefields, and become martyrs for the cause of their insane, fanatical religion. There is nothing to fear about the Iranian army. There is literally nothing. And what I think Trump would do, if he were smart, is he would give them the bunker busters to finish the jobs themselves, where there need not be a single American boot on the ground to do anything with respect to Iran. Israel can definitely take care of this problem itself with a little help of American ordnance, which they already have anyway, but with this particular American ordnance to take care of the job fully. Even though they don't necessarily need it, they can go in there and take care of those bunkers themselves. It'll just take a little longer.
So, Mark, Akira Felix is referencing an interview I did with the economist Michael Munger on unicorn government. Akira, I actually read his article on unicorn governance years ago in Ideas on Liberty magazine. I just found it online and I posted it to X. And I also sent it to you, Mark, by text. I highly recommend it. It's a very short article. Very, very good. It had a profound impact on my thinking as well, Akira.
When did you send that to me?
Just 2 seconds ago.
Okay, good. All right, good. So I'll have a chance to read it when I'm on the plane. When I'm in first class on the plane while you're driving to upstate New York.
While I'm driving, yes, and you're on a nice cushy plane with first class.
Hey man.
They're feeding you grapes.
No. You know who gets that? You know who gets that treatment? Frankie.
Frankie.
I give him the seat. I stand, unless I'm in a pod, and then I even stand, because my buddy deserves all the love.
He does. I can't wait to see him.
Yeah, he's staring at me right now because I have him surrounded by pillows in his bed, which he will at some point breach, and then find his way around the room somehow and get himself into some sort of trouble. Anyway, we have another story. Unless you see another question coming up, I don't. Somebody said, Peter says, great show yesterday. Loved the banter. I hope the IDF won't send a fellowship on a 3 books long quest to Mount Fordo. Better to send the giant eagles there directly and drop in the load. I have to agree with you, my friend. Bonnie Bertrand has internet problems. Dave's false equivocation between Iran and its terror proxies with America and Israel was mind-blowing. I mean, could you believe this guy? I mean, he literally cannot make the distinction between regimes. He literally cannot, or refuses to make the distinction between a democracy that has in its Declaration of Independence equality and separation of powers and protection of minority religions and minority ethnicities in its founding principles, and a government that has in its political charters the murder and destruction of millions and millions of people. He can't make the distinction between those two regimes.
Here's a great question, and this is a good one, I think, from Rock Chartrand. He says, does it really matter if America did bad things in the past or whether or not Iran has nukes, or is it just Iran's intent and actions that matter? I think there's a lot of questions in there. So whether or not America did bad things in the past, if Iran right now has a nuke aimed at us, I don't care what we did in the past. We've got to get rid of that, that nuke, right? But no, but it is relevant. Right. It is relevant that we, imposed a government on Iran. The reason I say it's relevant is because we need to learn from it. We ought to learn from it and not do the same thing again in other places. So to just say, well, Iran attacked us in 1979 by taking hostages, that does neglect a serious part of the context, right? Because we did install a government that the people there did not want. So you can't just ignore that. But again, if Iran is going to attack us, we need to do something.
Well, we did in Gaza. We did in Iraq. We keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, because at the time that we installed that government in Iran, we had one enemy that we were going for that made us myopically choose bad folks who happen to be enemies of our enemy, which is a terrible maxim for a foreign policy. Your foreign policy should be simply the protection of American interests abroad, the protection of American citizens abroad, the protection of individual rights within the United States of America, and any threat to those individual rights from outside. That should be the only governing principles that make you do what you do. Unfortunately, they were, I think, enamored of the concept of the domino theory, and that the countries would fall to the seduction of communism, and we would be surrounded on all sides by by communists, and that they would eventually metastasize in the United States. And there were certainly fifth columns within the United States of America doing the best that they possibly could to undermine the American ideas. But in my opinion, none of those countries are really threats, because once they give over to the statist central control mode of controlling their economies, political considerations take primacy over economic considerations, which are which are concepts of choice and individual rights, and it prohibits innovation from happening. So those countries eventually will collapse under the weight of their own contradictions, and they're not really a threat to us long term. So even if the whole country the whole world went communist, they would not be a threat to us. They would eventually collapse, like Venezuela collapsed, like China is collapsing as we speak, because it's turning more centralist economy, moving away from its market principles, like Russia, has really no power to enter into a war with us and Iran. They're really paper tigers when push comes to shove. I have to save my dog because he has broached.
Okay, well, we have a question. Shay says Lee has a question, but I don't know. I don't remember what it was. So, Shay, what was Lee's question that we wanted to ask? If you just throw it on up there, Mark is going to rescue Frankie, and I'm wanting to answer this question. We have quite the discussion going on in the chat about whether there's suppression taking place. Okay, Lee's question is, what is Lee's question? I need to know this. If I don't find out what Lee's question is before the day is out, I'm going to have a bad weekend, and I can't have a bad weekend. I need to have a good weekend.
Well, you're going to have a good weekend because you're going to be hanging out with me.
Yes, that's true. That's true. He says Lee's question is, and then just stop. There's no follow-up on this.
That's all right. What he's doing is he's leaving you in suspense for a reason. We can talk about the next article.
Oh, well, he says, what's your opinion of Lily Tino? I don't know who that is. Who's Lily Tino? Do you know?
No idea.
Okay, well, let's get to the next article until he tells us who Lily Tino is.
Okay, so the next article comes from Reason Magazine, and it deals with a guy who recently assassinated the Speaker of the House in Minnesota, and how the Republicans, some certain Republican pundits, went right online saying that this guy was a leftist.
Yes,
and that leftism is inherently violent, which I, of course, agree with. But of course, it turns out that this guy's a registered Democrat. They tried to pin him as a Democrat because he was appointed by Waltz to this committee that's nonpartisan, that just deals with business activities.
You mean he's a registered Republican?
He's a registered Republican.
Yeah.
But he's a registered Republican, though. In Minnesota, I think there's some.
Yeah, they don't disclose or something. He was registered Republican. I believe it was in Wisconsin. All the evidence indicates he's a Republican. Now, I couldn't care less.
Hardline and a hard.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't think that your average Democrat or your average Republican is seeking to go commit murder against their political enemies. So I thought it was a bit absurd that people went right to that immediately after the shooting. A deranged leftist, like I saw that in multiple places. Senator Mike Lee accused the guy of being a Marxist. That seems to be, it used to be on the left. The left used to be the ones with the hyperbole. You know, you're going to push grandma off the cliff, or, Joe Biden, they're going to put you all back in chains. Remember that. That was the left. But now the right, they're picking up on that, and they jump to this sort of thing. It must be a leftist. But it ultimately doesn't matter. It's a murderous scumbag, right? Like, what difference does it make? I mean, it's good to know the motivation, because when you want to get a conviction, you need motive, means, opportunity. You want to be able to bring all that in. But ultimately, even if it was a leftist, that doesn't mean that my neighbor, the Democrat, is suddenly a violent revolutionary. You know what I mean?
Nowadays, it just seems more important to score points against the political opposition than it does to actually get to the heart of the matter and find the perpetrator's actual motives. But I mean, let's face it, we have been dealing with years now of leftist violence. So it's easy for these reactionaries on the right to start claiming that every bit of violence out there is sort of leftist oriented, because leftism is inherently violent. If you think about it, Michael, it's inherently violent. And that's why the protests in the street, which are against the ICE.
What do you mean, Mark, by inherently violent?
So leftism's the concept of leftism started with the Jacobins during the French Revolution. They were radical democratists, and they also wanted to remake the world in the image of a Rousseauian utopia. And they spread warfare not only throughout Paris and France, but all over Europe. in order to attempt to do that. Democracy itself, radical democracy, which means the majority rules on everything, is inherently violent towards minorities. So
see this, but I don't like this. Can I tell you why I don't like it?
You can tell me why you don't like it. You'll be wrong.
I don't like. I'm not, because when you say a lot of people do this. Like we have in the chat now, Marx called for violent revolution. When I like the left.
Marx, as in me, or Marx with
Marx, Karl Marx.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, every person that's left of center is not a Jacobin, right? They're not. Robespierre is not on every corner looking to unleash the guillotine.
What about AOC? Is she?
Well, yeah, but this is my point. She's a socialist, but the left doesn't. That's like the far left.
Most consistent, in other words, most consistent leftist.
Well, but not necessarily. I mean, that's like, so the right. What would be the right? Are they all monolithic?
If the right represented traditional, which was what they did when these concepts of left and right originally came to pass, they were traditionalists. For Americans, that would represent a consistent classical liberalism, because that is the tradition of America. So that's what they would be trying to present.
When was this? Hold on. When was this? When did the right do this?
When the left and the right were formed, the left.
But that had to do with sitting in the French Assembly.
Right. The right represented traditionalism, which was monarchy at the time. When you translate those values over to the United States, the left represents radical democracy, still in the form of socialism. The right should represent classical liberalism. However, the right.
When has it?
Right. When, for brief periods of time, I would say by accident, you had individuals that represented that, but they were co-opted by Christianity.
Okay.
By Christian.
Barry Goldwater.
Yes.
Barry Goldwater. He wasn't a religious person.
No,
but he wanted to.
He did bring Christian elements into the Republican Party and into conservatism, as did Buckley.
Hold on, yeah, but that's the right. But even Goldwater, he wanted to use in his book Conscience of a Conservative. He liked antitrust laws. He wanted to use the antitrust laws to go after unions.
Right. I'm saying I have placed a definition on American right that I have never heard before. Perhaps you have, because I think you're a little more versed in the literature than I am. I'm the one who says conservatism should have been the conservation of classical liberalism. That's what it should have been. I don't disagree. Like Buckley. And it became something else even through Goldwater, because it was Rand that warned Goldwater, do not let Christians into the political party, or let them dictate elements of the political party, because that will be the end of conservatism as we know it. He didn't listen to her, and Reagan was the sort of the end result of the moral course that conservatives.
Well, I know Goldwater was critical of the religious element taking over the Republican Party. My only point is that when you say the left, it's not a monolithic thing. No more, any more than the right is. So to say, well, the left is violent, and then I can point to so many people that are left of center that aren't violent.
The left generally believes that the state has a responsibility to create a form of social and economic equality.
But the right in America...
Hold on. Would you agree or disagree?
Say that again.
The left, generally speaking, holds the premise that the government's purpose is to create a kind of social and economic equality.
I'm listening to you and read it. Yeah, I think so. But the type, first
that's
of all,
violent.
Okay. Well, then I got news for you. Then every single member of the United States Congress is violent.
That's true.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about.
The right has more nuances to it than.
Oh no, it does not.
No, it does. It's been co-opted by Christian nationalists right now, and Trump. But there are areas of it where there are people who have still given themselves over to Trump. But there are still libertarian-esque Republicans. But
they still favor taxation, Mark.
You think Rand Paul favors taxation?
Yes, I do. I do not think that Rand Paul is going to call for the abolition of taxation. No way.
I don't think he'll vote for the abolition of taxation, but do you think he's in favor of it the way it's operating now?
But that's not the question. Mark, here's the problem I have with this whole discussion. We start off with a murderer, and then we're talking violence. And now it's turning into government policy as a form of violence, which I don't necessarily disagree with. It's just not what we were talking about. And to say that your average person left to center is inherently violent it's not true.
That's not what I said. I said left
but it's not unless you're
inherently violent.
But then right is too.
The right as it's constituted presently, as in not
as it always was. If that's the case, then the founding fathers were inherently violent. They favored taxation.
The founding fathers were not inherently violent.
Why? They favored taxation.
They were the opposite.
They favored taxation.
They didn't favor taxation in the way that we have it today.
What difference does it make? They favored using force.
They were temporary implements to pay for temporary emergencies. They were never.
That's not true.
Yes, they were.
No, it's not. You had a.
There was no income tax. There was no income tax.
Hold on,
before
Mark.
The Civil War.
So what? They used government force to take money to pay for government stuff.
Yes, they felt that the government had to have the power of taxation, which is an error in my view.
Okay, but people left the center think the government needs to have the power to tax in order to produce the results they want. How is it different?
No. They thought the government should have the power to tax in order to keep the operations of government functioning. The operations of government being the protection of individual rights, whereas the left thinks the government should have the power of tax to create a social and economic atmosphere that it.
Wait a second.
There's a difference.
Mark. First of all, Hamilton and the Federalists favored tariffs to protect infant industries. They didn't favor taxation in order.
The American Enlightenment was as complicated as the European Enlightenment.
Hold on. My argument isn't that the founding fathers are inherently violent. What I'm saying to you is that if you're going to say the entire left is inherently violent, the standard is
the leftism. Leftism is inherently violent.
But then rightism is too.
Rightism, as presently constituted, is
as ever. Well. When wasn't it?
I disagree.
When wasn't it?
I'm talking about American rightism.
Okay. When?
Rightism.
When wasn't it, Mark?
Rightism, when it constituted the defense of monarchy, was in fact violent.
Mark,
rightism
when in America
by protecting classical liberalism.
Okay. When?
Violent.
Mark, when was that the case?
I would, when I would say Calvin Coolidge wasn't violent. He represented more classical liberal values than.
Wait, Calvin Coolidge certainly favored taxation. Calvin Coolidge.
Everything we're talking about is relative to.
That's precisely my point, Mark.
To the context,
Mark. That's precisely my point. That's my point.
Was Calvin Coolidge like a Wilson, for example? Was Calvin Coolidge anything like?
Are you asking me who was better? No, I think Calvin Coolidge is better than Woodrow Wilson.
Why?
Of course, because he was for less government interference.
Which meant what?
I think that Ronald Reagan was better than Bill Clinton. Yeah,
well, that's debate. That's actually debatable.
Yeah, sure. I think that Barry Goldwater would have been better than Lyndon Johnson. But if the standard is people who want to use the state apparatus to accomplish their goals, and they're going to use the force of the state to do it,
not their goals to accomplish social ends and/or economic ends. Now,
okay. Thomas Jefferson favored public education.
As presently constituted, the right is like the left in that respect.
Mark, yes, Thomas Jefferson favored public education.
Jefferson and many of the founding fathers had contradictions in their thinking. That is that is true.
Yeah, Mark, this is my point. When you say the right or the left,
but he wouldn't have funded. Did he fund it with the federal government? Did he fund public education with the federal government?
No, but he certainly purchased Louisiana territory with federal money.
He did, but did he fund a public education with the federal government? Did he spend
1 cent?
Because
Hold on.
he's for something, but did he spend a
No,
cent
he
of
was
money
for it done at a local level. It's still force.
Okay.
He's still using force.
He's not using it.
He's
What he's doing is
authorizing the government to use it, Mark.
What he's doing is he's mistaken he's right in a premise and wrong in its execution. His premise is that
Have you ever seen what he thought the Mark? Have you ever seen what Jefferson thought the penalty should be for sodomy?
Hold on a second. He was right in his premise that a free country can only remain free so long as the public is educated. He's wrong in the execution of that, in that he thought it should be done by public education.
Yeah.
And he's not alone in that. Many founding fathers probably felt that, not only probably.
No, see, this is the problem. Here's the problem. Akira says, I'm saying because John Galt's not the president, it's not legitimate. No, what I'm saying is that if we're going to have a monolithic idea and say the left is inherently violent, but the right isn't, and then as examples,
I'm not saying that the right as presently constituted isn't. The right as presently constituted is, because it is collectivist now. It was
when wasn't it?
It was more individualistic in Goldwater's day than it is today. You have to acknowledge that it was more.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm disagreeing with is that we can lump everybody into that's left of center and say they're inherently violent, depending on what you mean by violent. And if you're going to take such a nuanced look of violence, that if people that want to use the government to further their social ends, then what I'm saying is everybody was violent. That's for the most part on either side of the equation. Now, certainly there's more or less. Thomas Jefferson, I think he believed in the death penalty for sodomy.
Come on.
Look it up. Look it up. Look up what Thomas Jefferson thought of sodomy, what he thought should be done to sodomites. Seriously.
Okay. Now, did he have this opinion at one point in his life and finally change?
Not that I know of. He never ever recanted.
Okay. Did this happen out of guilt over his relationship with Sally Hemings? I mean, I want to know what's going on here. I will ask Grok this question.
Ask. No. Yes, of course, Eutychus. Of course, they were contradictory. Of course, in terms of fundamentals, the right in this country. Well, I'm not saying that the right and the left are equal. My only point is that first of all, right and the left are extremely fuzzy concepts at best. But if left of center, and we're going to say leftism is violent, rightism is not, then give me your distinguisher. Tell me your characteristics. Tell me your right-wing ideology. William F. Buckley certainly was for violence. William F. Buckley.
Yes, William F. Buckley is the standard bearer for modern conservatism, which I think is hilarious.
What about Russell Kirk?
I don't agree with any of these people.
Okay, let's back up. Let's back up to the origins of conservatism. Edmund Burke.
Loved Edmund Burke. I think
he's got a lot of good things to say.
A lot of good things to say. But he was a monarchist, but he had a lot of good things to say. My love for Edmund Burke comes from his understanding of what the American potential was. He understood more than anybody else in England, pretty much, and could articulate what the American potential was and how.
Hold on. We have a quote here. Greg Lewis has the quote from Jefferson: "Whosoever shall be guilty of rape, polygamy, or sodomy with man or woman shall be punished, if a man, by castration."
Yes. Now, it's important to note that sodomy is put in there with rape as well.
And polygamy.
Yeah, polygamy.
Yeah.
All right. So look, we have a man who has dark age principles.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's horrible
who didn't even understand the full humanity of blacks.
Mark, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree. I'm not saying they were inherently violent. What I'm saying is if our standard is anybody who wants to use government to attain their ends that they think are appropriate socially beyond just defending individual rights, if everybody that does that is guilty of violence, then the vast majority of people.
I have to say something because you brought this up with Thomas Jefferson, and this is not a party position, by the way. It's just my own particular.
Oh, I don't think Jefferson was evil at all, Akira Felix. That's not my take.
No, not at all. Just mistaken about some things and absolutely right about others. But
Can I
listen,
just? I
wait,
got to say
I
something.
wanted to say something that's not doesn't have anything to do with the Capitalist Party, but my own particular position. I do think rape should be punishable, punishable by death and/or castration. To be
Okay.
perfectly honest with you, it was at one time in America. It was at one time punishable by
Yeah.
death. It certainly leaves a woman with a scar that she will never, ever, ever get over. It's a brutalization of her mind and body that is permanent in nature. So I believe in doing permanent damage to the human being that did that. That's my own particular belief that I would never necessarily assert legally. Now,
yeah, I want to address, because he's in the chat and he's wreaking havoc. It is Scott Schiff. These people are, Scott and his buddy are. And by the way, anybody that wants to see what they have to offer, I just say watch my debate with William Swig. Just watch it. I mean, this is just absolutely absurd. He says he's talking about, if you admit that the left is worse than the right, then you have to root for the left to lose. I think they all suck. Whether they suck equally or not, I really don't care. If you ask me, do I want to get kicked in the nuts or punched in the face? Neither one is a good option for me. So that is irrelevant. The right is horrible in this country. The left is horrible in this country. That's why Rand would not call herself a conservative. She called herself a radical for capitalism, right? So the idea that,
however, you have to add something to that. However, because with my beginning affiliation with objectivism, certainly turned me more towards the conservatives and conservative intellectuals in the 90s. Which I lost affection for as time went on and as the conservative movement began to change. And with Trump in 2016, I predicted in the New Yorker that he would end the Republican Party as we knew it, which, from my point of view at the time, represented classical liberalism. When you had the Walter Williams and the Thomas Sowells of the world essentially defending conservative positions, which were more or less free market constitutional liberalism. That was what the Conservative Party was supposed to be conserving. The Christian nationalists have completely taken it over now, which Rand foresaw in 1968 when she had her discussion with Goldwater about this. She knew this was going to happen. She saw it with Reagan, which is why she couldn't vote for him. And we saw the moral majority start to take over the Republican Party. So it became a litmus test for a conservative to exhibit some form of Christian identity in order to move on. The exact opposite of what the Constitution demands. There should be no religious test for office. There should be none of that. Your only fidelity should be to the Constitution of the United States and to protecting the rights and liberties.
I agree with you. My biggest problem, and we're gonna have to wrap up. First of all, let me just say to Scott Schiff, Scott, I don't hate you. I just wanted to be. Scott Schiff gets on my nerves like maybe nobody else. But I will say this: in all my interactions with him that are personal, he's always been nice to me. He is actually the one that, for lack of a better term, discovered me. So I disagree with him vehemently. But I'm not saying like I hate this guy. And Scott, I hope you'll keep tuning in and making your comments. I just think that for whatever you want to talk about, for what conservatism was, whatever.
Wait a minute. I have a comment here from the secretary of the party. Traditional right, you mean when women couldn't vote and blacks couldn't live with a white neighborhood, that tradition? No, that's not rightism. That was within the Democratic Party, which I do not consider right. They're not conservators.
What about the Southern strategy, Mark?
Yes, I've heard of that as well.
Well, are we just going to ignore it?
Meaning that when Democrats who were socially conservative saw that the Democrats were turning secular, they went over to the Republican Party.
Or when the Republicans sought them out. I mean, National Review with William F. Buckley touted states' rights. William F. Buckley actually argued that the whites were the more civilized race, and so had the right to govern the blacks.
All of that is in.
Of course, it is. Insane. But this is kind of my.
And we have the anarchists now, like Tom Woods, arguing from John C. Calhoun's perspective about state rights. I mean, arguably one of the worst racial on the planet and racist apologists on the planet. Yeah. But I don't consider the anti-women's movement or the segregationists an aspect of the right, but we can discuss that area.
No, but this is we did forget about the shooter we were talking about. But my main point here,
gone over time.
We have you got to give the capitalists our day. My main point is this: left and right have become increasingly vacuous terms. They're very fuzzy. They don't really mean much. It's very difficult to designate where somebody is, left or right, oftentimes. And all I'm saying is that given that they're fuzzy concepts to begin with, to designate one half and say that half is inherently violent, but the other half isn't, when these terms aren't exact to begin with, is just not something. It's not a valid concept, and it's not a valid conceptual distinction. Now, we did go over, and my girlfriend's going to kill me, and I got to let the dogs out.
I do have to say one thing, though. Rock says the right is just as bad as the left, and personally, I'd say the right is worse.
That was a long time ago.
Okay,
you said that a long time ago.
Okay, but I'm just following the feed right now because I was busy arguing with you. I agree with all that. The right as presently constituted is worse right now because, if anything, because the left in their violence eat themselves, and they're so disorganized and so disintegrated that they eat themselves. The right's ability to organize and to be, as I think the classification in DIM would be like M1 or M2. They misintegrate, but they're still organized enough to do a great deal of damage. So they are quite scary at the moment. So I agree with Rock. And Rock, you have to tell me later on whether or not you liked my answer to your question previously that you asked me in DMs. All right, I have to give the capitalist thought of the day because we're all in trouble. We're all going over time. But look, here's this conversation today is an aspect of what I love about capitalism. Capitalism is a society based on individual liberty. It is a society based on transparency. It is a society based on free thinking, which means that people within who can agree on multiple things can have conversations like this, where they disagree, and in the disagreement, the most rational perspective will finally come to a head. One hopes. So we have the flexibility to change. We have the flexibility to alter our position. That's what makes free countries better. That's what makes Israel better than Iraq or Iran or Gaza or with the West Bank, because it has the capacity to introspect. It has the capacity to change. That only comes with freedom, and freedom of the capitalist system, which allows us to have these conversations, which is in essence a form of public introspection, where we get to check our values, see whether or not they're true, check our premises, and correct for our errors. A capitalist society is self-correcting, even if that takes a long time, a few generations, because the bad behaviors and the bad laws are so ingrained, they take a long time to suss out. And because they're so embedded in our culture, we still can course correct because we're free. That's my capitalist thought for the day. And folks, we're going to see you on Monday, same bat time, same bat place, 9 a.m. Pacific.
Did I do this? Eastern. Did I turn us back to the old format, or did it happen? I don't know. Greg, you're right. I just noticed it now.
Oh, I did too. My head was smaller.
Okay, my closing thought is this. First, this is for Scott Schiff, who I assume is under the Ayn Rand fan club. I absolutely think that the left needs to be defeated, and I absolutely would not give left-wing ideas. Let me put it that way. Left-wing ideas a pass. They absolutely need to be defeated. The problem is siding with Trump is not the way to do that.
Absolutely.
Because that garbage needs to be defeated as well. Mark, I'll see you tomorrow, brother.
All right.
Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Peace.